listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, Astral Meadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm joined by the insightful Eline. He is a practicing ceremonial magician with over 4 years of experience, a dedicated explorer of the Western esoteric tradition, and has a deep interest in astrology. His journey into spirituality spans multiple traditions from around the world, bringing a unique and expansive perspective to his work. His fascination with astrology adds another layer to his esoteric studies, enriching his understanding of the unseen forces that shape our reality. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Astral, and thank you for that kind introduction.
Yes.
It's almost 5 years now that I've been practicing, whether you want to call it high magic, ceremonial magic, astrotheurgy, all based in the traditions of the Hermetic Golden Dawn from the late 19th century into the early 20th century. And it is, if you asked me many, many years ago, if I could ever imagine myself sitting here doing something of this sort, my answer would have been no. But here I am.
I love that.
Almost 5 years ago, I had what so many of us have come to call an awakening. And that was a period of intense heart opening and optimism and courage and motivation to engage with spirituality, metaphysics, and my life in general, not just that, but my mundane life, with greater passion and intention. And of course, as with everything, none of it is perfect, and none of it is a linear progression necessarily all the time. But I feel like a very different person in many ways from the versions of myself that I was previously. And yet, that part of me is still there, and I grow into a deeper appreciation of the challenges and the person that I was and the environment that I grew up of, and even understanding the catalytic elements of the religion that I was brought up in, Catholicism. It's so funny because a lot of us who get into things like ceremonial magic or witchcraft, anything of those sorts, which are very ritualistic. We often come from a Catholic background. It's just something that feels natural. But more than that, the path that I'm on now, which is admittedly an ever winding kind of path, and sometimes I get crap from my own fellow magicians about having such a diverse number of influences. And ceremonial magic is one of the things that, for me, it's a tool, by the way. That's how I see it, as a tool for connection with my divine self and divinity in general. So it isn't a religion to me, because the way I view these things is there is a level of flexibility, and we grow, we change, we adapt. And admittedly, even if there was a point where I didn't feel like it was working for me in producing a better version of myself, in helping me to support others and produce a better world in even a small way, then it's not something that I would engage with. And so that is one aspect of the deeper philosophy behind this kind of empowering practice, is to do what works. So that is something that I adhere to. That is a principle that I adhere to strongly, to the point that I would even change what my practices are as long as it's working in the path and within the corridor of intention that I am channeling through my higher self as I understand it now.
Yeah, I really love that because I feel like there is this devotion to our spiritual practices, but there are times where we kind of outgrow certain aspects of it. And when we do that, there's always things that we need to release so that we can make way for something new. But that was hard for me because I have a very fixed energy. And so sometimes I get hung up on a certain ritual and I'm like, but I feel like I need to do something else. But it's always okay to reevaluate, like, okay, this served me, for a certain amount of time. And now I have evolved a little bit, and now I need, maybe a different practice, something that's more supportive of me in the present moment. So I really love that because it just gives us space to grow instead of boxing ourselves into one particular tradition or practice indefinitely, which just feels daunting. Um, if you think about just how many times we've kind of upgraded over the course of just this lifetime, um, how limited we would be if we never let go of some of the practices and we're open to new things. So I love that you brought that up because it is a little bit different than some of the other systems where, they devote to one thing, they do it every day for their entire life at this time, this direction, and there's a little bit more freedom to that, I feel like, in the magical path. So,
Yeah, I consider this particular path, and well, I should say more specifically, this practice to be, for me, it's like the Swiss Army knife of metaphysical practices because it has so many different uses. I can concentrate on the earth element, for example, if I want to embody more of my physically healthier self or engage in smarter financial practices. If I want to inflame my will, I can conjure more of the element of fire. If I want to go up to higher levels, I can utilize the energies and archetypes of the archangels of each of the Sephira of the um, Tree of Life of the Kabbalah, because that is another foundational tradition behind our practice.
mhm,
Um, but ultimately, one of the things that I think distinguishes me in this practice from some people who follow a similar path is that I do believe there is greater flexibility. Um, I was inspired to take this path when I heard Damien Eccles talk about it on an episode of the Midnight Gospel. If you all remember that from Netflix, it was something that I'd encountered before in vague and kind of like tangential ways that I just thought, oh, that's interesting, or um, I can't think of his name right now, but there were elements of it that I might have judged as silly
mhm,
at one point in time, but when I was in that period of awakening in the spring of 2020, there was something that began to resonate within me, within that heart center. I often point to this area, the chest between, um, down the center of my body physically and on deeper levels, etheric, astral. And, since we're one of the viewpoints that I take from the Western esoteric traditions is that we are comprised of multiple layers
mhm.
ourselves, just as reality is. And I can sense into that. And I feel centered in that part of my core, as I call it. And that is one of the things that kind of becomes a compass for me towards the truth of my higher self.
Beautiful. That's definitely a beautiful visual image to sit with. So, what does it mean to live a life of spiritual substance in a world so focused on surface level appearances and trends?
That is one of the more challenging aspects. I think a lot of people come to these alternative corridors of metaphysical studies and spirituality from a place of just wanting to get away from things like anxiety, depression, a feeling of being lost. And I've certainly experienced a lot of that in my life, as so many of us have. But once you get to that point of feeling more centered and not as affected by those things, you begin to see the potential for development, for emotional and mental maturity. And you begin to understand that it's not just about turning to the spiritual and the metaphysical in order to run away from the things that bother us about ourselves and about life, but to take what we actually have. And it's like the magician card in the tarot, who is learning to use his tools. And the tools are literally everything about ourselves and the world around us, and to use those to the best of our ability to put it metaphorically, like the alchemist would say, to turn lead into gold or to turn unconsciousness into consciousness. So, but let me perhaps expand a little bit on why I started talking more about substance. And sometimes these words are more reflective of something deeper that I can't quite articulate all the time. But part of my path has been a devotion to the Greek goddess Hecate. A lot of us, we all kind of like fall into these sort of additions into our path. And that is something that I found in common with other magicians and other people. This calling from this goddess, who's the root word of her name, Heka, is often said to be to go beyond. And in my development of listening to the deeper parts of myself, see, the way I see it, I can't verify for you or anybody else that I'm definitively talking to this goddess, but there is a definitive sense that I am communicating with an intelligence that is beyond my normal persona and ego. And as far as I can tell, at the very least, I am communicating with an aspect of myself that resonates with her archetype.
Mm.
And one of the things that I felt and sensed that she said to me was, I want you to focus on becoming a person of substance.
Mm.
So, what that means to me is we often identify with certain labels, such as I am a ceremonial magician. I am a person of the alternative spiritual community, etc. But those are just labels. We are at the root and core souls that are individuated and experiencing a very, what I often call, intimate path. I mean, it is very peculiarly personal in some way, even if there are aspects of it that are identical or similar to many other people. But it is going to be, and it is wanting to be expressed in alignment with that intention of the higher self in a very unique way. And that is part of the magic of the divine as expressed through us in this mundane realm. And so the mental and emotional growth, becoming a person of greater confidence, but also a person who understands the value of humility in its truest sense at the same time. And as I might talk a little bit more about how we live in this duality, I mean, there are some people who talk about the experience of non-duality, and that's a valid perspective as well, but they're both valids with a truth to them. And I am trying to understand and utilize this duality, this polarized existence of reality in a way that does turn more of that lead, of the suffering, the challenges, the pain, into the gold of joy, of beauty, of wisdom. And so it is in that process and the changes that are expressed through me in my existence that are becoming a person of greater substance. Uh, I did do a previous podcast several months ago, and I told some more of this story before and my awakening. And one of the things that I brought up was the very beginning of my awakening, there were certain illusions and delusions I had about myself, my life, the world, and that's normal. I think we're always encountering those things, and we shouldn't feel bad about that or judgmental about ourselves or even judgmental about other people necessarily. But I had this experience, I call it was kind of like um, it was an intense infatuation unlike anything I had ever encountered, where this woman that I met just triggered this within me. And so there was a lot of my shadow that came up through that, and a lot of my beliefs about my self-worth being tied into someone's ability or lack of ability to reciprocate feelings. And that eventually became sort of a thread that I pulled, and I began to unravel what I call, and many others would call, my false self. And so I began to find more of my own intrinsic self-worth. And to, for example, in this specific, I finally started to get away from being attracted to emotionally unavailable women. You know, there's no escaping being vulnerable in these things, and I do approach talking about these things with as much courage and vulnerability as is appropriate, because I do believe it helps some people to get through those sort of things. I was part of a twin flame group online for a while, and now my views on that sort of thing have evolved, and I see the whole twin flame thing is basically just a box. You and I have talked about this before
Mm-hmm.
um, at length, and I'm sure many of your guests have. Um, and I think that, again, it's just another box.
Mm-hmm.
It is a belief system that helps us to make sense of some very powerful feelings and synchronicities and the like. But ultimately, there's deeper meaning beyond it. Eventually, I grew to see that there is no person that you need to be in relationship with. There is no real need beyond, what is normal for human beings in our physical vessel to feel, loved and, you know, not alone. But I tend to now say that the only real twin flame you have is literally all the rest of existence.
Mm.
It's source itself, because that is the catalyst that never stops coming at us.
Right.
So that was a huge source of emotional and mental maturity and spiritual maturity for me, was getting past that kind of delusion of I need this to happen. This sort of, fantasied story is going to happen, and finding, like I said, more of my intrinsic self-worth. And so it's not an easy path. The path that I'm walking is not a path for those who kind of want to exist in this little bitty snow globe of their ego mind, where everything, is as expected, and it's going to go the way that you want, the way your ego mind wants all the time. I've learned to become more and more comfortable with that, and to take greater joy in the amount of opportunities that actually exist for us as human beings, as souls embodied as these human beings right here, right now.
Awesome. So you brought up ego a little bit. So I'm going to move to this question. What role does shadow play in becoming more conscious? And how do we learn to trust even the uncomfortable or chaotic aspects of our path?
That's the thing. I often say this. It wasn't just that my heart opened at the time and I began to feel greater optimism and confidence, but the way that that comes about authentically is by getting to know your shadow. In some cases, it feels exactly like a confrontation. And so that's where the hidden gold is, and that's where some of the lead is. And even things that are, I try to relate this more to the mundane because that's what we're dealing with. That's the soil that we're working in, is the mundane world and the shadow and the unconscious. So, for example, I just got done with a job that I was working. I was a delivery and sales driver for a particularly well-known brand. And I came back to that job, and for example, I was better in sales. I ended up being one of their best salespeople. And that was never something that previously I was good at or I had confidence that I could do it. Without the support of my practices and my awakening perspective and awareness, I would not have been able to do that. And so that is an example, as much as boring as that might sound to some people who just want to be, who are into the woo-woo aspects of these things. But that's the work.
Hmm.
And it's very humbling too, because I could just go off and, say that, oh, I'm a person of greater spiritual power, blah, blah, blah. And, I talk to deities and archangels and whatnot, and oh, look at me. But if it doesn't have a concrete, substantial effect of positivity in your life and the lives of others, then it's kind of a form of spiritual bypassing in many ways, and it's just further delusion. And that's what I and many other people refer to as the false light aspects that we can fall prone to in spirituality.
Yeah, I feel like these practices help open our eyes to the mystical experience that actually is life in this mundane reality. Um, and so we do these practices and we connect to the essence, of these beautiful spiritual beings and, the tools that we work with and all that. They ground us, they act as guides and support. But really, it's like it's up to us to make it practical, to actually work with it in a tangible way. And the people that I meet that, it's almost like they're so mental about it all and they're not actually applying any of these things in their real life. They tend to flip-flop. And they get bored of it and they go to like this different religion. They're like, well, this isn't working for me. I'm going to try something else. And then it's like they sample all of these different belief systems because they're like, that didn't work. And like when I watch them just as an observer, I'm like, well, you didn't do the work though. Like you were trying to escape, you were avoiding, you didn't, there was no devotion, you didn't keep coming back to it. You know what I'm saying? Like you didn't
Hmm.
ground into the practice, and that's why it didn't work. And now you're going to tell everybody that, well, that didn't work for me or whatever. But it's,
The moment they come up against
mhm,
something deep from within their own shadow, they go, oh, this must not be working now. And
right.
then kind of give up and say, oh, let's just try another thing, which I realize is ironic considering what I was talking about before. If this practice didn't work,
Hmm.
but
Well, you're
that's
still,
the paradoxical
yeah,
nature of.
right. You're still staying like true to the overall path, though. You know what I mean? You're just allowing detours. You're not changing the structure of your religion all the time. And that's what I'm talking about. These people that they just, they're literally going from one religion to another, and sometimes back. And I'm just like watching them, like, but they're never satisfied. And the thing is it's because you have to actually apply it for it to work. Or else it's just like reading a self-help book and doing nothing that is suggested and not actually making it work for your life where you're at. So, like we were talking about, the mutable aspect is life changes. We have different transits that are activating different areas of our chart. So, our practice might shift through certain cycles of life, through certain activations within the chart, or just, through job changes or this and that. So it's not that we're not being mutable and flexible, but we're still true to the path itself, which is finding the magic in everyday life, you know. And if we can't find it, then maybe we need to bring ourselves back into this present moment because I feel like magic is always available to us when we're practicing presence. And that is what this path has taught me. And it's really just bringing me into that resonance, that space where magic is possible. And when I'm in that resonance, then I can see it everywhere, you know, at all times. Like even when I'm washing the dishes, like it's
Yeah.
still a magical process. And so, but it takes practice of coming back to this moment over and over and over again.
You have to be willing to confront yourself deeper and deeper. And I can sympathize. It's not easy. And I haven't done it all myself either. I have a friend of about 20 years or more, and we reconnected, and he's been kind of a mentor to me. He's one of the most intelligent and definitively psychic people, intuitives that I know. And he's challenged me a lot and helped me to see perspectives that I couldn't see, and to
Mm,
push through things like, my sense of self-worth in relation to romantic relationships and things of that nature. And I think a lot of people are also like they jump from one thing to another because they're looking for the perfect feeling and they
right.
want to replicate that feeling. And that's something that like I can feel spirit kind of urging me, keep going and keep talking about this. Because at one point, all I really wanted to is to replicate the energy and the almost mania of that heart opening experience. And this part of me that was sort of saying, from my ego perspective, well, it's not working. You don't feel that way anymore, or oh, now you're going through a difficult period again, and this wasn't supposed to happen on this path. But that's where you have to keep going, and you have to be able to go deeper and to keep going until, that breakthrough happens.
Right. Right. And it's the practices for me actually help me get over those roadblocks and those forks in the road that feel just to me almost like impossible. And that's where the magic becomes the most important tool that I have because, you know, that's when I might need a little support from my guides or from the universe or whatever to kind of coach me or encourage me and remind me of my power because sometimes when we take too many hits as humans, we do tend to fall into that kind of doubting and questioning and like, what am I doing wrong? And it's actually you're doing it all right. It's supposed to be ups and downs. I think about the if you're on a heart monitor and it's up and down and it's beeping, you know, and it's like if you're going up and down in life, then that means you're living. And if you've plateaued, then that means you're you're not, right? Because if it's like beep, like
Right,
then what are you really
right,
doing at that point? So to me, if I'm dipping, then that's great. I'm gonna have something to kick off from at the bottom. But there are points in the lows where I understand that despair and questioning and like, you know, but that is part of the spiritual process. Going into that underworld and facing the shadows and working through that and allowing it to shape you, knowing that you will rise again because that's how it goes. It's always ups and downs. That's the pendulum swing of life. And that's where I really love the Hermetic principles, like the law of rhythm, because I can trust that
yep,
if I'm in hell right now, that I'm gonna ascend to heaven soon, and I go as high up as I go down. And so I know that if I'm in this depressed moment, that inevitably I will rise, and that actually gives me hope and trust in those moments. So that's where these little philosophies, you know, these mantras, these phrases that we pull from these spiritual practices, like it's important, right? Because our minds play tricks on us and try to convince us that we're doomed, you know? There's no one that loves us. There's no support. You'll never get through this. And my spiritual life is actually what helps remind me of like that's just your thoughts. Like that's that your thoughts aren't reality all the time, they're what you make them.
Right.
So if I can change my thoughts about it and say, well, this sucks. However, and that's the important part. However, like allowing the sentence to continue after the sucks. That to me is empowering in itself.
Yeah. And perhaps there is a plateau, I don't know exactly personally what the limitations, are, but the way I envision it is there can be a healthy plateau where you just feel
Right.
far more at peace
Mm-hmm.
with who you are, with your life, with life in general. And as long as you continue feeling that sort of desire to be in life, reminds me of the word eros, and all the mythology and power behind that world. And as long as you still have that fire,
Mm-hmm.
that inner fire, and I think this was something that like Manly P. Hall talked about, then you've got that spark that keeps going.
Mm-hmm.
And so even when you reach that plateau, as long as you are in attune and alignment with that, then I would say that it's working. I don't have all the answers, and I know that. And before I started this podcast, there was something, a phrase that was coming to mind. And oftentimes, spirit speaks to me through songs, just like it does for many people. And there's a David Bowie song about absolute beginners. And we are always, if we are in that state of learning and reception and growth, we're always absolute beginners in some way, shape, or form.
I love that. And it's also, I don't know who is it, Socrates or one of the ancient philosophers is like, the more I learn, the more I know nothing. And it's like, there's always a next level. There's always a way, some opportunity to help us expand more if we so wish to take it. Um, and I do think it's important to look at it all as if you're a beginner because then you're never satisfied and you're going to keep seeking and keep growing. And that's what to me makes life so exciting and fun. But then that does bring in that fire element again, because fire is very exciting. It's very passionate and it's warm and it keeps us in that state of like wonder, and when we light other people's fire, I was definitely thinking about when you were talking about Manly P. Hall with the sacred flame because sometimes other people's fire is like kind of muted and dim, but if some of us have a little enthusiasm, then we can actually be kind of a landing spot for them to light their torches. So I feel like this is where we kind of come in as a community because we can, help others in those moments where their flame is kind of like getting weaker and that
Yeah,
fire element comes forward of inspiration.
one of the shadows to this practice and the way it has been embodied on a collective level by people practicing things is this idea that it's all about doing it for ourselves.
Hmm.
But I see it as coming together, and then that's how we build the greater fire is
Hmm.
when we come together through all these things.
Right.
And I think that is something that I'm seeing more in the alternative spiritual communities, more talk about doing things together because we have this consumerist society that has atomized us in many ways. It's
Hmm.
kept us separate or it's propagating um, more hollow and superficial levels of communication and relationship with each other. And part of the reason that this is all coming through for us and we're awakening is that we're here to transform and to break through that.
Right. Yeah, I love
So I
that.
also wanted to go back to something which you said about awe, because I know earlier I made it sound like I wanted to kind of put down the, as we often pejoratively call the woo-woo aspects, but there is something incredible about the sense of awe and wonder you get from
Hmm.
the experiences of doing these practices For example, I remember the first time I started invoking the archangels of the tree of life of Kabbalah. And it was this indescribable sense of both peace and power at the same time. And at the time, I was working this job helping my friend out with his business and bread and tortilla delivery. And so I was going into the grocery store because, some of the things that we put on the shelves in the grocery stores aren't put there by the regular employees. They're put by, as I was one of those people, a vendor back in the day. And I had just done that. And I'd gone in there and I was like, oh boy, here I just had this wonderful experience, this magical experience and ritual that I did earlier. But I don't know if I want to do this boring, tedious job. And this woman that I don't recognize at all came up to me, and I don't normally have these kind of experiences. And she puts her hand on my shoulder, and I could feel the energy come through her as she said, "It's not so bad, is it?" Or something to that effect. And I had the chills because there was something in her energy that I knew was telling me those were the archangels you just invoked,
Hmm.
literally coming to you and saying, we're not just in your mind.
Hmm.
This is real. And so, and it's not something that from a logical perspective makes sense. Like, well, Chris, that doesn't really prove that. You need to, X, Y, and Z, and this
Hmm.
is what. But when you have those sorts of experiences, and you have even the little synchronicities, whether it's feathers you find, you know, or someone repeats a phrase that had just been running through your mind, um, and then more profound things than that. That sense of awe is so reassuring because we
Hmm.
do come to this world with our blinders on for a reason, and a lack of awareness. But when you have the experiences that come back and the giant synchronicities, the energetic revelations that come through, that makes this all so much easier, and so there is something um, very, very youthful and wonderful in that. So I don't need to put down, the seeking or the desire to have profound and incredible mystical experiences,
Hmm.
which I have. I had incredible changes of in states of consciousness. I've One of the first experiences I had was I was laying in bed one afternoon taking a nap, and I had this almost lucid dream that I was at this party, and I looked at my best friend at the time in this dream, and I said, "Would you like to hear about my latest tarot and angel card readings?" And I woke up from the dream, and I was like, "Well, that's silly. I mean, I that just doesn't, um, it just didn't jive with me at the time." And then months later, I had a surprise birthday party, and I kid you not, I watched every scene from that dream
Hmm.
happen in sequential order with multiple elements looking exactly the same in the exact same room. And I didn't realize it immediately as it was happening. But the moment I turned to him and it was just in this weird state, and I said, "Would you like to hear about my latest angel and tarot card readings?" And then all of a sudden it was as if a shudder went throughout my entire body. And in that moment, I realized that I had watched everything from this dream that I'd had happen in front of me. And that was one of those moments of awe and wonder where I
Hmm.
went, okay, this isn't just some psychological trick.
Right.
This is real.
Hmm. Right. And
And then I went on to, yeah, go ahead.
I feel like a lot of people have similar things like that. There's whole movies like Deja Vu and all this stuff. And it's just they're not seeing like the sacredness of it. But I think it's universal even for even for the people that are very in the logical mind and don't want to give it meaning, I think it's just something that we all inherently tap into sometimes, especially like you were in that lucid state. And I do think we're able to kind of travel around and go back and forth on the timeline sometimes, where you went into the future a little bit, and sometimes I think we might go into the past a little bit. But I love when it gets validated like that, so that you're just, I don't know, it's like you can almost trust in your own intuition or the signs that are showing up for you that this will eventually make sense if it doesn't now, because so much, even when I'm in my records or things that come forward in dreams, at the time, I don't necessarily always know what it means. So I try to make a mental note, or I actually have a notebook for words and stuff because I'll totally forget, because that's the thing, you almost have to catch them because you might not remember, but later
Yeah.
on, like a year later, I'll see the thing and I'm like, "Oh my God, that is." But how beautiful. Like we are so magnificent and powerful, you know. We all have these psychic gifts, but I think some of us are just more appreciative of them. And so we get more of those experiences based on our gratitude and based on being more in resonance with it, because we do tend to start believing once we've had them over and over again, and it's just like, okay, I'm listening. I'm listening. You can spirit, you can send me these messages whenever, and it's like this allowance of it gives us more access to it, where I feel like the fear, or the people that are like, oh, delulu, they start
Hmm.
shutting themselves off from having it because they're like, I don't want to be crazy, or like that the Bible said that was evil, or blah, 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 blah. And so they tend to put up some kind of field around it. And I feel like they get less hunches and stuff because of their fear alone puts them in a different resonance. But those of us that like nerd out on it and we're just very open to it, we tend to start receiving more and more. I mean, I probably have like 10 big synchronicities a day where I'm like, oh my God. And I love it though. I want that in my life because it always makes me feel like I'm in alignment, like I'm being held. The universe and me are tight and we are working together. And I feel like it's that openness that gives me more of those validations and those experiences. Some people have to go take like ayahuasca to have the same exact experience I have just walking up the street. And I'm like,
Right.
wow, like that flower talked to me too, I didn't even have to take psychedelics, because once you're in resonance with the magic of life, you start to feel it and see it all over the place.
Yeah. You get excited even for people as they're having their own experiences, and you get to be that
Mhm.
person who supports them. Like I had a family member had something very surprisingly positive development, and something they were, you know, a decision they were waiting on. And then they sent me a picture of an owl feather that was literally sticking
Mm-hmm.
out of their yard. And they said, "Do you think that's a sign?" And I'm just like, "Are you kidding me? If
Right.
that's not a sign, this giant alpha." And then I relayed that to you, and then you pulled a card for me, and
Yes.
it was the owl card.
Yes.
And then later that night, they often do come in multiples. I noticed that the new place where I started a part-time job, there's an office, and guess what's in the window of that office? A giant owl feather.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I love it.
like Carl Jung. Yeah, there is something to it, but some people, they just feel safer
Mm-hmm.
being in that little, like I call it, the snow globe of the
Right.
ego mind. I noticed that there are some people who approach spirituality from this sense of wanting safety. Um, they want to, they pursue it almost because they're looking for limitation, so that they can feel safe within those walls.
Mhm.
And I've had to develop from somebody who is judgmental toward that to somebody who is more sort of like, I understand.
Mhm.
When somebody, for example, was raised or they've been through a relationship with narcissistic abuse, somebody who violated their boundaries over and
Hmm.
over and over again, they can begin to look at something like spirituality as a source of limitation and rigid thoughts and things like that, because that provides them that sense of security. Whereas for me, at one point, what I was looking for, which was so different from my experience growing up, was the ability to expand
Hmm.
and sense into greater opportunities and to be filled with a sense of wonder in all of the different paths that we can take that do work, and all of the different varied ways that we can be in harmony and resonance with the current of life. And so I think that the way people look at spirituality is, of course, very dependent to a large degree on their own
Hmm.
psycho-spiritual background. So I have had to learn to, again, be less judgmental towards those expressions of spirituality, but also be a person who's just going to be honest and authentic and say, I see it in a very different way.
Right.
And we can all respect um, virtue, and we might have different emphasis on different values and things like that, but ultimately, the vast majority of human beings seem to be in alignment with wanting to be what we could, for lack of a better term, call being virtuous
Hmm.
and expressing ourselves in creative ways. Well, there may be some people I realize too that are, I call it disconnected, unaligned, because there are certain things that have to be able to occur in this reality that are, anywhere from agitating to horrific,
Hmm.
uh, because that is the balance of the kinds of experiences that we have to be capable of having in order for all of this to work. I like to say there's perfection in the framework, even if there's not perfection in the details.
I love that. So let's pivot a little bit. You've talked about Hecate, but what do you feel the sacred purpose is of deities like Hecate and the Morgan in your spiritual life? How do they challenge and guide you?
Well, and for me, it is this intelligence that I can communicate with that brings me from beyond my normal egoic perspectives. They challenge me, Hecate challenges me to go beyond my comfort zones, whether that is in the mundane world or in the magical sense, and to face that with courage and strength. My own devotion to her, it's not just on a mental level, there's also something energetically happening
Hmm.
where it's as if I begin to embody her energy through the practice of envisioning. What I practice is based upon the personal gnosis of a sorcerer named Jason Miller, an author, and it has worked very well for me. And I definitely, in keeping that thread going, that is something that is building and sustaining within me, is that strength to go beyond. And then I've had another deity that I've talked with you about. For some reason, the dark divine feminine, as they call it, has been something that's called more to me
Hmm.
than any other aspects or archetypes. It's also related to the Sephra of Binah from the Tree of
Hmm.
Life,
Hmm.
and that kind of feminine wisdom embodied in there. But the Morrigan for me is about the drive, the push to go beyond the threshold that Hecate embodies and brings me to. And so there, I think that these deities, these archetypes, these intelligences, they call to you if you're willing and open. It is a thing of choice and sovereignty uh, to work through the aspects of yourself and your life that you most need to for your overall development and growth. And each time as you um, work through these things, there are more doors that open, there are more archetypes that open, and it just becomes this journey that is just constantly changing and flowing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. and I don't know if I told you. I probably did tell you because I always think of you with these two goddesses. But I did a spread the other day, and I used five different decks, and one I pulled Hecate, and from one I pulled the Morgan, and I was like, okay, well, the ladies are coming forward before I
It's
prep
so
for this
funny.
podcast. So it's
Yeah, that you pulled both of
I've
them.
never pulled them in that order. One deck I had just got. And the other deck, I knew the Morgan was in it, but I hadn't really had that experience yet. So I've been kind of waiting because you talked about her. And she did show up in a reading the other day. So I was like, well, that's interesting. But I feel like you brought her more into my sphere. And when she showed up, I swear my third eye was buzzing. It was like 5 minutes where I just felt this intense pressure in my third eye. And I'm like, okay, something's going on that's calling me more towards maybe working with her. So, but had you not brought her up, I might not have even realized, what she kind of
Right.
represented. So I appreciate you always sharing. And that's why I love, we talked a little about Jung, but Jung coined this phrase that I used in one of my classes years ago, which is activating synchronicity. And the reason I love the cards, like the oracle cards or the tarot cards, is because they put these pictures. So you see an owl or you see the Morgan, and then a week later you go on a podcast and the topic is the Morgan, and you're like, oh, okay. Like it gives you an opportunity to respond and to recognize that synchronicity. And so I love using this variety of decks that has all these different, sometimes it's animals or sometimes it's archetypes or particular landscape or whatever, because or herbs. Like I had one where I kept pulling the same herb, and then like this person like brings me this herb, and I'm like, "Oh my God, how weird." But if you just give yourself a chance to respond to that, then the synchronicities, they are more obvious. So that's one of the things that I love about working with cards, because it's a way more clear because you remember pulling that owl card, or you remember that random plant. And maybe at the time you're like, what does yarrow mean to me? And then you're on your walk and there's just yarrow like growing in between
And
the
there's
cracks of the
right.
asphalt. You're like, oh shit. Okay, I get it. I get it, spirit. And I catch myself so much retreating back because I almost overlooked it. And then when it comes back up, it's like, actually, maybe I should reflect on the significance of this. What does this archetype really want to tell me? And what's going on in my life that would put me in resonance to that energy to begin with? And to me, that's just a simple way of bringing magic into my everyday thing, is like I pull some kind of card every day just to see how it makes me feel. And sometimes I don't necessarily come back to it right away, but at some point it does tend to come up in some form or fashion if I'm paying attention. So,
Yeah, there's reminders that we are and we live within this mental space that, like the Kybalion would say, with the Hermetic principles, all is mind, you
right,
know, all is
right,
mental, all is mind. Yeah. And if you have the awareness, you see that over and over again.
right. Right. And maybe we are somewhat creating that reality because we thought about it and now it's popping up because we kind of manifested it with our thoughts alone. All right. So, how has engaging in high magic and psychic development reshaped your understanding of personal will, destiny, and divine co-creation?
And that is a newer chapter in my life as I started to take a psychic mentorship course aimed at my own psychic development along with a group of other people. And it's been another powerful, potent experience of mine. Until I stepped onto these sorts of paths, I wasn't meeting, all of these different people like you and so many other people. There's an occult magic happy hour group that I'm affiliated with and that operates out of Boulder in Colorado, for example. And it blows my mind. Like, I am so grateful for these connections that I built with people like you and
Mhm.
members of that group, and then lots of people on Instagram, for example. And it's all come together in this way of like co-creation.
Mm.
And our volition matters and our choices matter. And it is something that it feels like our souls almost have an algorithm where we were drawn toward these things, like a moth to the flame, almost
Mhm.
not in a destructive sense, obviously, but and it so what I do and whether or not I take advantage and whether I'm aware, for example, of the clues that spirit is giving me at times, it all matters. I remember one of my first signs during my awakening was what I call the day of the white deer and the black feathers. So I was driving to work and I saw, and I'm not going to say that it was like a deer with albinism, but it was just a very strikingly white deer. And I thought, boy, that's weird. And then I go in to again put bread and tortillas on the shelves in the grocery store, and the bread aisle I'm working in, there are black feathers all over, like the birds had just shed a bunch of feathers in a grocery cart, and then somebody accidentally dumped it all on the ground, and there they were. And immediately I heard this thought, which was unlike most of my other thoughts, as it often feels when spirit is speaking to you. And it said, pay attention. And that's the thing. We often, like you and I were just talking about, we sometimes forget to pay attention. But there are times when we get these sort of signs, and it's like, oh, I know what I'm doing here.
Mhm.
This is here for a reason. And from that day on forward, I began to eventually lead down a path of maturing mentally, emotionally, and spiritually far greater than in any other period of my life since. Now, is that just a narrative that became a sort of permission slip, as some people might say? The maybe. Does it matter? Does it really matter if the end result is betterment of myself, my life, and my ability to support other people in life for betterment and evolution?
Right. I love how you have this beautiful balance of like logic, but also like being open to the more intuitive aspect of life. And I feel like you're a great friend to talk to about certain things because you do initially always bring the logic up, but then it's like this permission slip to explore it from this other perspective as well. And I feel like that's definitely a gift that you have, of using maybe both aspects of your mind simultaneously.
And it's
And
a gift I didn't always have either. That's what I
mm,
mean about the mental maturity.
right.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't know you before you started stepping onto this path. So that's hard for me to believe, almost because you've always kind of been the source of wisdom for me since I've known you. So it's hard to imagine you just being like in the mundane world without having magic in your life because you are like the magician in my life. So
Yeah, it's funny. I drew a card from tarot deck before I started that job and living with the people that I was with during that time of my awakening in March of 2020, and that card was the Magician.
hmm
Which, the tarot cards can be very mundane and they can be subtle things, but now I look back and I laugh because I literally became the magician.
right.
Which, by the way, there's two different streets in that house where all that happened to me. Um, and one is 11th Street and one is 11th Way. So there's your 1111 as well.
I love it. Yeah, I do tarot readings pretty regularly now, and I do not pull the magician all the time. It's not a card that just comes about regularly. Where there are some cards that I feel like and it's interesting doing readings for other people now because sometimes I'll be like, wow, that is the exact same spread I just, last week had. And it's like there's these collective stories playing out. And I mean, there was a couple back to back where I was like shocked. They came in, they were both asking, they were like, I got laid off, and they had the same sequence. But the
I
magician,
know.
the magician has not really shown up very often. So I feel like it actually is one of those, it's kind of a pivotal moment card, and if it does show up, I would take note of it. So definitely when I pull card like any of those major arcana cards, I'm paying attention because they want us to
And
work
they
with
do.
them.
They will sometimes pop up consecutively. And, the odds of it happening the way people like you and I have seen it, where it's meaningful,
Right.
it's astonishing. I remember, um, so I got into the tarot a bit more before the period of time that I call my primary awakening. There was kind of a similar period energetically before I moved to Colorado, but it wasn't quite the same. Like I like to say, my shadow came forth during the primary awakening, and so that's an important aspect. But I was dating this woman, and she messaged me one day and said, you know, I'm so sorry to do this to you, but I'm going back to my ex. An ex, which she had explained to me had been abusive, and they'd had a really, and I'm just like, oh God, what is going on here?
Hmm.
And I drew a card. It was the Tower.
Hmm.
And then my friend at the time, unbeknownst to, like, I didn't say, you draw a card too, or anything like that. I told him what I drew, and he said, I drew a card for it as well, the Tower.
Hmm.
And then another instance recently for me was the Seven of Swords. I had a reading from this wonderful young woman who is a channel for the Morrigan. Um, Her name is Izzy, and she has a YouTube channel and all this stuff, the Morgan's Oracle. But she did a reading for me, and there was a card that fell out on the floor, and I didn't know until later that it was the Seven of Swords. And then I was doing work with my partner for the psychic mentorship course, and the card that kept coming up for her was, you guessed it, the Seven of Swords,
Hmm.
repeatedly. And eventually I started to understand the reading that Izzy did for me was about my job and my job search. And a theme that kept coming up for my partner was also the same thing. And that Seven of Swords just fit perfectly
Hmm.
because it was how I was settling and not looking at other opportunities, and therefore experiencing, you know, um, a loss of some opportunities and things that I could have been doing. So it is just so real
Hmm.
that there are people who are atheist materialists that I've heard of who get into doing tarot and oracle cards. And then even with that mindset of absolute logic and, very little or no room for anything metaphysical, they started to say, oh, this is not just coincidence. This is not just the mind attaching meaning where it doesn't, like, this is real.
Right, and it's valuable because it gives you like the language to process some things that like when we're talking about like the shadow and the unconscious and the subconscious and all this there's a slight veil for most of us where it's hard to access it. And so those unconscious things kind of just come up and they kind of control like the course of our destiny and stuff. And we're not even aware because it's unconscious. So when you start doing things like astrology and tarot and studying archetypes and things like that, and you're bringing those unconscious stories, and putting a spread on your table where your conscious mind is looking at it. Now you're able to see patterns that you couldn't because it's unconscious. So I think it's
Exactly.
important and it's so valuable because it gives you the language, it gives you some pictures to chew on. It gives, this openness of like, okay, well, if this is the course, then when I have full power and free will, how can I take the reins over my own life and direct this so I can see where I'm at in this storyline? How do I change the course of action here? And it's not always a tell all of like this is definitely going to happen. It's like this is the energy that's available right now, and this is the role you're playing. Do you want to continue playing that role, or do you want to embody something else? Do you want
Hmm.
to take it a different way? And that's I think that's where like the will comes in a little bit, because if you really know where you want to go, then you have so much more power. And just thinking about like the natal chart, like with the glyphs that have arrows, we got like Sagittarius and Mars. And so I always tell people in their chart, when we get to those particular archetypes, you have to give them direction. And you're so much more empowered when you do, because you know where you want to go. And if you don't know where you want to go, you're just shooting arrows like you don't know where they're going to land. But magic is empowering because it gives us this authority of saying, okay, this is where I am right now. And there's some things that maybe I can't control. I can't control other people. I can't control the weather. Some of us might be able to, but I can control where my intention's going to be and where my direction, where what I'm wanting in the future. And that's magic. You're using your will to create the reality that you want, to put all of your focus on those points to manifest them. And, I think sometimes people think magic is just putting the spell jar out and shaking some salt and it's like that's just the ritual that we're doing to get our mind on board with it. Because I feel like
Right.
it doesn't matter what the ritual looks like. That's just our mind is watching us do this and we're like, this is our intention. Are you paying attention, mind? We are going to manifest this and we're going to bring these materials together that represent each aspect of this. And we're going to make these statements and we're going to be so settled on where we want to go next, and that we can literally create the reality that we want out of that space. It's not just like this woo stuff, it's like it's meaningful, and it really gives us all of the power to make the changes too. We set those intentions and then along the way we might change certain patterns. Look into our lifestyle. Like, is my lifestyle limiting that vision that I want? And so it gives
Right.
us the space to reflect on the role that we're playing. And I just feel like it can be so helpful, and it's frustrating when people just say, "Oh, it's the woo," because it's this delusion has saved me, like
Right.
I am such a better person because of this. I'm so much more intentional with my thoughts and with my words, with my practices. I'm more open with my heart. I'm more accepting. And it's like it has been totally life-changing for me as well, to kind of walk this path of seeing the sacred in every experience.
Yeah. A lot of people look at tarot and divination that don't have a lot of experience or a lot of knowledge about it, and they immediately assume it's about fate and you can't escape your fate. That's not how people like you and I who have experience and greater knowledge see it. It is a tool of empowerment.
Right.
Now, there may indeed be things that are, if they are not fated, they're practically fated in certain ways,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it gives us the opportunity to respond to it in a
Yes.
different way. If we use it well and we use it right, divination that is, we can stretch ourselves beyond the expectations of the familiar and the ego mind to make a different choice or a different kind of response. And so this is what helps us to mature.
Right. And if you think, okay, so this event might be fated, but you choose how you respond to it, then you're actually altering the outcome. Because the only thing that would be fated is if you were just reacting the way that you would if you were acting unconsciously, just going through the motions.
Yep.
But if you're approaching what we see as fate very consciously with full awareness, that's where you have all the power. That's where the free will comes in, because you're saying, okay, this might be fated, but I am responding in the way that my higher self would in this situation, not this unconscious egoic whatever. It's not running the ship anymore. And I feel like that's where Carl Jung's work is so, I mean, it's just so valuable.
Mm.
I feel like it goes alongside the spiritual path so well because he was such a beautiful mystic. But everyone's like, oh, kill the ego, kill the ego, kill. I'm like, ugh, just pay attention, okay, to the ego. Like, try to understand what that feels like. Look back on your life when your ego was making choices. Did you like that? Did you like when you responded out of fear, out of trying to protect yourself overall? Sometimes it's very important, but sometimes that ego limits us as well. But if you
Yeah,
befriend the
it's
ego,
something we
you
can.
know when it's doing it because you're friends with it now. And you're like, oh, that's the ego. I'm going to work with it. It's obviously a little triggered right now. I'm going to
Right,
sit.
right. I'm glad that you're reminding me of this. It is something I have to remind myself many times that the ego is a friend of mine. It's
Right.
not an enemy. Yeah.
Right.
We are actually stretching and growing and transforming our own ego. Now there
Mhm.
are powerful and incredible experiences of temporary ego death, but we
Right. Right.
can't really exist here in this state without one. So it is something we have to develop a more positive relationship with. That was
Right.
something too that's come up in the psychic mentorship course that I'm taking through Rhea Thorne. If you all are curious, it's RayathoRne. Wonderful woman, also a ceremonial magician. Um, but we started dealing with the inner family, our internal family system, if you're familiar with that, from modern psychology. And we start looking at these aspects of our mind and our ego, for example, the protector.
Hmm.
The protector is oftentimes what has gotten kind of stuck and stagnant from our childhood because it was doing the only job and the best job that it could in our
Right.
childhood.
It served a
Faced with
purpose.
circumstances where there were less choices. Yeah,
Hmm.
it served, and so you start to respect it and love it with that kind of unconditional love and understanding and wisdom. And then you approach it that way, and you can befriend it and you can
Right.
ask it to help you expand beyond your normal reactions and to respond more. Yeah,
Right.
I love it.
Right. Yeah. And once you really feel what that's like when the ego is there and you can sense it, you can also comfort it and say, hey, we're safe. Right now, we're safe. I can feel that you're trying to do the thing and you want to lash out or you want to, prevent this from happening. You want to protect, but actually, we're safe. So I have this prayer that I receive for my records that kind of helps me bring it into that space when it's happening. And it's like, such a breath of fresh air when I can just hold that space and remind my whole being that we actually are okay. And it's a trauma thing. It's like a trauma response where my body wants to say, well, we got to protect ourselves. You don't want to do the thing that would actually change the course of your life for the better because it's so much safer here. And, you don't want to step out on that ledge because that's dangerous when actually I can see that it's great. It's the best next thing, but it's so much safer. And that's seeing like the patterns, befriending the ego and letting ourselves know that we are safe, we are being guided. It's okay to step out of those comfort zones sometimes. And for me, it's like a must. I don't want to just get comfortable and never transcend these boundaries that I've put on myself when I was in a place of survival mode. So I feel like that's where the psychological stuff, like working on the shadow, working with the ego, all that's really important on the spiritual path as well. All right, so we're getting close to wrapping up. Was there anything else you kind of wanted to end with?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity to come on here and converse with you and share some perspectives and experiences. And I am so excited for where all of this is going, not just for people like us on an individual level, but as a collective
Hmm.
as well. I look at people engaged, for example, in psychic development as those who are pursuing a way to discern truth through a different means, that perhaps we can come together and see things in truth as a collective in a way that we never have before.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that we are developing paths and means for people to overcome very real problems and challenges in this world. And it is mind blowing when I think about it from that perspective. And like I said, it's just very, very exciting.
Yeah. It's a very beautiful time to be alive. I know there's some chaos, but um there is a lot of magic that exists within chaos. So, kind of grabbing on when we can and steering the force into, the path that feels most aligned for us. I feel like it's a good time for it. And I feel like there is a lot of magic happening. I mean, if you got to disconnect from the internet and the news and stuff, but if you do that, you could sense that there is change on the horizon. So,
Yes, or else you can come back to it and transform that lead into
yes.
gold.
Yes.
So,
Yes, that's a
yeah,
great way. That's a great wrap up. I love that. All right. So for those who would like to connect with you or learn more from you, where can they follow you and support your work?
I am most active currently on Instagram
Mhm.
as Christopher Paul Squared. So again, that is Christopher Paul Squared. So if you'd like to, I invite you to follow me. There are periods of time where I come on and I vlog a bit and talk about some of my ideas. Down the line, I do look forward to providing more professional tarot and oracle card readings, as well as psychic readings and mediumship and the like. So I am an absolute beginner in that,
Mhm.
but so far it's going very well, and I appreciate the opportunities I get with people in
Mhm.
order to develop and support them through those means. So thank you again, Astral, for your support in allowing me to come on here. And thank you for your friendship, which has been so very meaningful and empowering for me as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, this episode is so special to me, and I'm very grateful that you took the time to come on here. And I just love being able to share you with the audience because I've been following you for a while, and I've learned so very much from you. And you are a wonderful tarot reader already. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you expand and maybe settle into that line of work more. So when you do, if you start that YouTube channel or you do start practicing more publicly, you can come back on and always use
Yes,
this as a landing
I
spot
love
to
it. And
share.
I love watching your progress as well. It is incredible. And for those of you who, maybe watch every once in a while or you just stumble upon this episode, Astral is one of those people out there in the metaphysical businesses who is genuine, who is authentic, and very, very effective at what she does. That Capricorn stellium is no lie.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you so much. That just made my day. Thank you for that. All right. Well, I look forward to chatting with you more in the future. And thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.